Hello there, my name's Anthony Clinton, and again I wish you good evening. And we're going to do something a little different tonight compared to the other videos I've been doing. Tonight I want to take you on a little journey through part of my experience which relates to something I believe the Bible is talking about. When I was about 16, I was heavy into drugs, and I started to have a terrible experience which I couldn't explain. Whenever I went on a trip, or LSD trip, or took some other heavy drug, even something called hash oil, I would go on this terrifying trip, and we'd be listening to heavy metal rock music and modern rock music of that day, and I would feel terrible. In fact, often I felt frightened. And I started to have an imagination that I didn't want to be there. I started to have an idea that I was feeling like I was in hell. I started to think about the devil, think about going to hell, and thinking about terrible things in relation to judgment of God. And I couldn't understand it because I didn't want those thoughts, but they were pounding in my head, and I had no idea what was making me think that way. So I started to contemplate my life and wonder what on earth was happening. It seems like I would go on this experience when I'd take an LSD trip, and I'd have a sense of demon forces, even people that were with me involved in the drug. I remember looking into their face, and I visualized somehow some sort of evil spirit in them, and I had no idea what was happening to me. But not only that, I felt my mind being tortured by the effects of the drugs and these thoughts that came into my head when I was listening to rock music. I had many favourite bands, but one of my favourite bands at that time was Black Sabbath. And I used to be right into that heavy metal rock music, and Black Sabbath were the big proponents of that era of heavy metal rock music. And I used to love it. I used to dance and go crazy. I used to do these, like, I don't know how you'd call them, but when I went to dances, local dances in the place where I lived, I used to do these hypnotic dances, and I would go absolutely crazy when I hear the bands like the band Black Sabbath. And of course, another band which is very significant, the names of these bands, they have a significance when we look into this subject. One of the bands I used to listen to, which was the one that was with Black Sabbath when they toured, and it was called, would you believe, Dead Forever. The name of the band was Buffalo, but the album they had was called Dead Forever. And I began to think that there was a problem with some of this stuff that I was into, and I had no idea how I was going to get out, because I was starting to take drugs. I felt addicted, but I felt uncontrollably heading towards a direction in my life that was frightening. I had no way to fully understand or interpret it, but I continued, and the more I thought about it, the more I seemed to be in trouble from drugs, and I took more and more and more drugs. Looking into these rock bands, there was one we used to have. It was a Moog synthesizer, and it was, these guys aren't mucking around. We think, it's just a marketing ploy. But it's not a marketing ploy. I believe, without a doubt, that these guys are involved in something that is absolutely destroying the moral fibre of our youth and society, and destroying the minds of the young people. And what's more, I believe that God has put it in the Bible to warn us about it. And I'd like you to look with me in a portion of Scripture where I believe God revealed to me that these satanically inspired musicians were written about in the Bible. Now, I knew this many years ago, and I understood it from many years ago, but I hadn't really got it together in my mind and thought to put it on a video. I didn't have the kind of media outlet which comes through the wonderful internet. I mean, you can spread the knowledge of Christ and the knowledge of the Bible and something like this. You can spread it all throughout the internet to a multitude of people. But it's very important to me to be able to tell you this message from part of my experience. As I began to look into this music and started to worry and stress about the horror of judgment and the fear of going to hell, all these thoughts were coming into my head, and I really didn't know why, because I had mocked God, I had rejected God, I hated the thought of God. I'd been brought up to believe in God, but any notion of God I hated, and I didn't want to think about God. But while I was into this music and taking these drug trips, I began to think, what's going on? Why am I thinking about hell? And as if I was in some form of prison that I couldn't escape, and I was doomed to go into the eternal fires of hell. I don't know why I was thinking that, until one day a friend of mine said to me, "Hey, listen, Anthony, look at this. There's a message in the music. Look at that. Oh, there's some sort of message in the music." And it just struck my mind, well, if there's a message, I'm going to start to investigate. And I began to look at the albums that I had and listen carefully, because most of them didn't have the lyrics. Some of them did, but most of them didn't have the lyrics, and most of them they were very hard to listen to and to write down. But I tried to write them down. I was trying to listen, and the heavy metal music is over the top, so you don't really hear what's going on. So I started to contemplate a way in which I can find the message and the motivation in the message that made me sort of seem to be controlling me like a puppet. I was like a puppet to the music. It seems I couldn't loose myself from this control. Of course, now I have a full understanding of it, and now that I've had a full understanding, I can look at it with a proper perspective and begin to interpret what was actually happening. I know what was happening now, and but then I didn't know. I'll tell you, when I discovered that in rock music there was this evil message, and everywhere I went through the music there was either blasphemy of Christ, blasphemy of God and Christ, same thing, and blasphemy of many blasphemies of anything to do with God. It was cursing God, and it was worshipping Satan, and it was talking about hell. In fact, some of those records were telling you are doomed to go to hell. I remember one of the lyrics said, this guy was running through the forest, and you hear his footsteps running in the background of the music, and then he falls down on his knees and he begins to pray, and he's asking God for mercy, and then the music would come heavy, and you'd hear the voice in the coming in the music. The song would come in the music. No, too late. No escape. Too late. And this was not just one rock album. This was multitudes. Many records I began to look at had this message of doom and hell. There was a group called Cream that had Wheels of Fire, and you look at Black Sabbath. He's actually screaming, and he's trapped in the never-ending well. And many other records related to hell, Satan, death, blasphemy of God. And so I thought to myself, I'm in trouble. And I started to contemplate God, and I grabbed my Bible. I had a Bible, and I grabbed my Bible, and I started to look for answers. And, when you don't know God, unless God reveals himself to you, you start to only picture God as a God of anger, a God that only wants to judge you and punish you and to send you away into an eternity for being disobedient to his laws and not doing what he said. So I only saw that kind of God. So together with the rock music, my mind was filled with condemnation, and then I looked into the Bible. Only at the parts in the book of the Bible that stood out to me were God's punishment. And it's almost as if the devil himself was breathing his evil message in my ear. Bad news. No escape. You're destined for hell and you'll never get away. And I started to think, if I don't find an answer, I'm in serious trouble. And I began to plunge uncontrollably into more and more drugs, heavier drugs. And I started to use the needle. And I was just looking for a way of escape. And if you like to hear my testimony, you can hear my full testimony, which is on my website, Gate to Enter for Life 47. If you go to there, Gate to Enter for Life 47, you will be able to hear my full testimony, how I came to Christ. But I'm zeroing in on an activity that has affected the whole world. You say, rock and music, they're only joking, Rock and roll is just a form of hype, and they're not really serious. It's just, they're just putting up a message, and it's a marketing ploy, The subject of Satan is a marketing ploy. It's interesting about that.